You will do quite a bit of network troubleshooting when you're trying to determine why the network is slow, why someone's not able to start a particular application, or why their network connection simply isn't working as you would expect. Whenever you sit down at someone's computer, there may be a very different network configuration than someone else's computer. So it's useful to run a utility to see how this particular system is set up. The command you want to use in Windows is ipconfig. This will tell you information about IP addressing, subnet masks, gateways, and other information that's important when troubleshooting the network. The ipconfig command can also tell you information about the network adapter you're using. So whether you're on a wired Ethernet connection or a wireless link, you can get more information about your network interface card using ipconfig. And of course, you may want to know what DNS servers are configured on this device. Did this device receive a DHCP address and from what DHCP server, and other important network details. ipconfig can give you this information and a lot more. Let's say Rodney has asked us to stop by his computer and perform some diagnostics. Before we start making any changes, let's see how this particular system is configured. We will run simply the ipconfig command. This tells us that we are on an Ethernet network, gives us IPv6 address information, IPv4 information, subnet masks, and default gateway details. But if we'd like more information, we can run the same ipconfig command with the /all option. And this provides us with a great deal of additional information, such as the hostname, DNS suffix information, the type of IP routing configurations are on this system. We have information here about DNS servers that are configured, and we can see here that DHCP is enabled and that we have not configured an IP address using DHCP on the system. This gives us a great deal of information about how this system has been configured and what those individual settings might be. When you're troubleshooting network connectivity issues, one of the first things you'd like to know is if the machine you're trying to connect to is really connected to the network. One of the ways you could do that is by using the ping command. The ping command tests reachability by sending a special packet to a device and getting a response back from that device. It uses a protocol known as the Internet Control Message Protocol, or ICMP. Let's say in this case, we'd like to know if Rodney's machine is really able to communicate to his primary DNS server. If we look at the results of our ipconfig command, we can see that the primary DNS server is 192.168.1.155. So we will use the ping command and we'll specify 192.168.1.155, and we can see that we have connectivity to that device. We pinged that device with 32 bytes of data, and it got 4 separate replies back from that device. This also tells us response time information for receiving that response from that particular IP address, and it provides time to live information as well. We'll talk more about time to live in just a moment. Now we've got a summary of all of the pings that we ran. By default, we sent 4 pings. We received 4 back, which means there was 0% loss. And we can see the approximate round trip times. Minimum are 5 milliseconds. Maximum is 322 milliseconds, which means the average is 143 milliseconds. Based on this information, we can determine if we really are able to reach that particular device, and we can get information about how well and how quickly we're able to send and receive information to that server. Our local computers are constantly communicating across the network to other servers, and there may be times that other devices are communicating to your device to gather information as well. One way that you can see these connections is by using the netstat command. Netstat stands for Network Statistics, and it's a command that's used in Windows, Linux, Mac OS, and other operating systems. The default netstat command can tell you a lot of information about the communication occurring across the network, but there are some options you might want to try to give you some additional details. For example, netstat-A will show you all active connections on a Windows machine. If you're interested in knowing exactly which Windows binary was used to be able to send or receive this network communication, you can use netstat-B. If you are going to use that command, you will need to run in an elevated mode or run as an administrator at the command prompt. By default, netstat will try to perform DNS resolution so you can see the fully qualified domain name instead of IP addresses. But if you'd rather see the IP address, you can use the -N option to only show IP in the netstat output. Let's run the netstat command on Rodney's machine. We'll run netstat without any other option to only show IP or run as an administrator at the command prompt. By default, netstat will try to perform DNS resolution so you can see the fully qualified domain name instead of IP addresses. But if you'd rather see the IP address, you can use the -n option to only show IP in the netstat output. Let's run the netstat command on Rodney's machine. We'll run netstat without any other options and just see what we get. You can see there's a column for protocol. In this case, it would be TCP or UDP. There are local addresses and port numbers that are mentioned. There are also foreign addresses. This is the other device that we are communicating with that is different than the local address. And then there is a state for that communication. Sometimes we are established, others might say close wait. There may be other statistics that you'd see depending on the status of that network connection. To get an idea of how things might change with network communication, let's start up a browser communication using Chrome. It loaded up the Google homepage, and now let's run that netstat command again. You can see there are a number of new entries in this netstat table because we initiated additional network connections to these servers located at Google. It's difficult to tell from this view exactly what applications are associated with these different connections. So let's close out that window and open a new command prompt, but in this case, we're going to run it as administrator. Windows now asks for administrator access so that it can launch that command prompt with elevated access. We will use administrator, and I will use the password for the administrator account on this domain. And now we have a command prompt that is running as administrator. Now let's do the same netstat command, and you can see there are a number of different connections that are going back and forth. Now let's open up our Chrome browser again and have it launch that Google screen. And in this case, let's run a netstat-b. You'll notice the same connections are shown, but for every connection, you can see the executable that's used for that connection. For example, we have a number of different connections down here that are connecting over HTTPS, and you can see that Chrome.exe is the application that caused that network communication to occur. We rely on our domain name servers to be able to convert from a fully qualified domain name back to an IP address, and we can also perform an IP address to fully qualified domain name conversion. We also can gather a lot more details from DNS servers, and we can use the utility NSLOOKUP to be able to perform those queries. There are extensive options available in the NSLOOKUP application. Although most of the time we're simply performing a lookup of an IP address or name, there are many different options within NSLOOKUP, and I highly encourage you to look at some of the other capabilities. You might end up using those to troubleshoot a number of network issues. Let's perform a simple NSLOOKUP from this machine. Let's see if we're able to get the IP address those to troubleshoot. a number of network issues. Let's perform a simple NS lookup from this machine. Let's see if we're able to get the IP address of www.professormesser.com. So I'll run NS lookup and then I'll specify www.professormesser.com. This will go out to our default DNS server, which is 192.168.1.155. And this tells us there are 3 IP addresses that are associated with this fully qualified domain name. There's 104.22.72.108, 104.22.73.108, and 172.67.41.114. Normally, we would see a one-to-one relationship between the fully qualified domain name and the IP address, but I built in additional redundancy into my network configuration, so this is not an unusual response when you're querying this particular fully qualified domain name. Many of the commands that we've done so far are very specific to TCP/IP, but there are some commands we can run that gives us information about the Windows operating system and how it connects to other devices. The command that we would commonly use for this is the net command, or NET. There are a few net commands you should be aware of. One is the net view command that shows us what shares might be information about the Windows operating system, Windows fully qualified domain name. Many of the commands that we've done so far are very specific to TCP/IP, but there are some commands we can run that gives us information about the Windows operating system and how it connects to other devices. The command that we would commonly use for this is the net command, or NET. There are a few net commands you should be aware of. One is the net view command that shows us what shares might be available on a particular device. There's the net use command that allows you to connect to those available shares. And then NET. There are a few net commands you should be aware of. One is the net view command that shows us what shares might be available on a particular device. There's the net use command that allows you to connect to those available shares. And then there's the net user command that can be used to view information about an account and change passwords associated with that account. Particular device. There's the net use command that allows you to connect to those available shares. And then there's the net user command that can be used to view information about an account and change passwords associated with that account. Back on Rodney's machine, we know that there is a server called Cheyenne 1, and there are shares on that server, but we don't remember what those shares are. So we're going to use the netview command with the name of that server, and we'll use 2 backslashes to designate that this is a server name. CHEYENNE1 is the name of that server, and you can see that there are a number of shares available. There's the net logon share and the sysvol share. These are common shares that are built into the Windows system, but there's also the mission is there are 72.108. We're simply see if 72 user available. There's user command that can be used to view information about an account and change passwords associated with that account. Back on Rodney's machine, we know that there is a server called Cheyenne 1, and there are shares on that server, but we don't remember what those shares are. So we're going to use the netview command with the name of that server, and we'll use 2 backslashes to designate that this is a server name. CHEYENNE1 is the name of that server, and you can see that there are a number of shares available. There's the net logon share and the sysvol share. These are common shares that are built into the Windows system, but there's also the missions share and the schematics share. Let's say that we'd like to connect to the schematics share. If we were to look at our system, I'll bring up the File Explorer, we can see that currently we have a local drive, that's our C: drive. We also have an X drive, a Y drive, and a Z drive on this system. So let's now connect to the schematic share by using the netuse command. For netuse, we need to specify the drive letter that will be associated with this share. Let's say that we're going to use H: in this example, and then we'll specify the server name and the name of the share. The server name has 2 backslashes and CHEYENNE1, and then another backslash and the name of the share, in this case, schematics. And if we hit enter, it says that the command completed successfully. If we now go back to our File Explorer, we can see that a new drive share has appeared on Cheyenne and the name of the share, in this case, schematics. And if we hit enter, it says that the command completed successfully. If we now go back to our File Explorer, we can see that a new drive share has appeared on Cheyenne for H:, and it is our schematics share. If we're troubleshooting Rodney's computer, we may want to get more details about their user account information. So we can run the netuser command to provide those details. Let's specify that this is RMCKAY, that's the username for this user, and let's also specify that this is going to be for a domain. If we hit enter, we can get more details on this username. We can see the full name for this person, information about country codes. Is the account active? In this case, yes, it is. When was the password last set? When does it expire? You got information about login scripts and login directories, and information about any groups this user may be a part of. So if you're troubleshooting this particular user and you want to know information about what groups they belong to or how their account is currently configured, simply use the netuser command. When we're communicating to another device on the network, that other device might be on our local subnet, it might be in our building, it might be in a different city or a different country. One way that you could see all of the different connections between you and that other device is by using the traceroute command, and in Windows this is abbreviated traceRT. Traceroute uses ICMP, which is the same protocol we use for ping, to be able to determine where all of the different routers might be between our device and another IP address. It uses a feature of ICMP called time to live exceeded, and it uses that in conjunction with a time to live setting. In the world of IP version 4, time to live is not referring to seconds or minutes or a time of day. It's referring to a number of hops. A hop is referred to as a single connection passing through a router. So a time to live of 1 would be your connection to the first router. Time to live of 2 would be able to give you the information to connect to the second router, and so on. Time to live relies on ICMP and the ability to send these ICMP messages across the network. Some firewalls will filter out this ICMP information, which means you may have limited visibility when trying to determine where a particular router might be. We're going to run a time to live on Rodney's computer, but before we do that, let's see what's happening behind the scenes. This is a setup that has a couple of computers on our local network and a device that's on the remote network. In this scenario, we're going to run a trace route from Sam's laptop to Jack's computer. And it's going to pass through a few switches. You can see those switches are the square boxes. And then it's also going to pass through a number of routers. The routers are the round icons that you see on the screen. Each time we hit a router, that's a hop, and it's going to specify what the IP address is of that hop on the local machine. So for instance, let's run a trace route to 10.10.30.10. Obviously, 10.10.30.10 is Jack's machine here on the remote network. The first step is Sam will set up a trace route, and it will set a time to live of 1, and that will be sent to the first router that is closest to Sam. That first router sees that time to live is equal to 1, and one of the responsibilities of every router is to decrease time to live by 1.
You know your business better than anyone, right? So why not build an app to run it with Base44? This finance
Each time a packet goes through. So time to live is going to be changed to 0, which means the time to live is exceeded. Every time you hit TTL equals 0, a message is sent back to the originating station saying, sorry, we weren't able to complete this because time to live got all the way down to 0. Your time to live has been exceeded. When traceroute receives that TTL exceeded message, it puts a message up on the screen that says our first router is 10.10.10.1 because that's the device that sent back that time to live exceeded message. Now the process repeats, but instead of sending it out as a time to live equal to 1, the time to live will be equal to 2. When it hits the first router, the time to live will be decreased by 1, so time to live is now 1. Then it goes to the next router, and time to live is decreased one more time, down to 0. Time to live has been exceeded, and that message is sent back to Sam's workstation, and the results are put on the screen. Process happens again, where time to live is now set to 3. This goes to the first router, where time to live will go from 3 to 2. Goes to the second router, where time to live goes from 2 to 1, and then goes to the third router, where time to live hits 0. Time to live is exceeded. That message is sent back to Sam's workstation, and the results of that are put on the screen. This process will continue until we finally make it to that end device of 10.10.30.10. So now time to live is incremented up to 4. That means it goes to the first router and decreases to 3, goes to the second router, goes down to 2, goes to the third router, TTL goes down to 1, and then finally makes it to Jack's workstation, and Jack now is able to send back a reply to that message saying that it made it all the way through from Sam's machine to Jack's machine. The results of that are also put on the screen, and we now have our trace route showing all 4 hops between Sam's machine and Jack's machine. Here's an example of a trace route. This trace route is to 9.9.9.9. It takes a few seconds for trace route to run. This is the result of a trace route that I did to 9.9.9.9. It says that it's doing this to dns9.quad9.net, which is the DNS name associated with 9.9.9.9. And you can see there are 8 different hops that occurred to get from my machine, which is 10.1.10.1, all the way down to 9.9.9.9. And you can see with each one of these, there are 3 different attempts that were made. And in each attempt, we're able to receive information about response time for each one of these hops. We also have IP addresses and names associated with each router along the way. So we know that 10.1.10.1 communicates to 96.120.58.37. The next router in these hops is 96.110.208.117, and so on. We can track every hop along the way to determine exactly what routers are involved with this communication. If we run into problems on the network, we can run this trace route again and compare the results we got originally with the new set of results. For example, if a router in the middle of the conversation was to fail, even though that router is in a different city or a different state, we still know what IP address was supposed to be there, and we can show that this is the normal route versus the route that we're seeing now. These ping functions and traceroute utilities are incredibly useful when you're troubleshooting the network. But what if you could combine the features of ping and traceroute into a single utility? That utility is PathPing, and this is a utility commonly found on most versions of Windows. PathPing has 2 different phases that it goes through. The first phase is that it runs a traceroute to build out a map of the connection between your device and the destination IP address. On the second phase, it then runs a round trip test to each of those hops. So now we're able to get a better understanding of the performance from our device to each router on every hop from our device to another. Here's an example where I ran a path ping to 8.8.8.8, and you can see the first thing that it does is run a trace with each router along the way. So now we're able to get a better understanding of the performance from our device to each router on every hop from our device to another. Here's an example where I ran on every hop from our device to another. Here's an example where I ran a path ping to 8.8.8.8, and you can see the first thing that it does is run a trace route, device to another. Here's an example where I ran a path ping to 8.8.8.8, and you can see the first thing that it does is run a trace route. This is a very similar view to what we saw when running an independent trace RT utility command. This is one that shows us all of the different hops, and you can see there are 13 hops to reach 8.8.8.8. This is the output from the first phase of the path ping command. Once it understands what all of these different hops are, it will then start computing statistics for each one of those routers along the way. And you can see here that path ping says it's going to calculate statistics for 325 seconds. Once those 325 seconds have elapsed, PathPing then presents you with information about every hop, the amount of round trip time between each one of those. We can see how many packets have been sent and how many were lost along the way. And we can see information about the addresses at each one of these hops. Most of these work flawlessly, but you can see there must be a firewall at hop 12 or some type of filter because we weren't able to get response time statistics from that particular IP address. If you're going to be working with Windows as a user or as an administrator of the system, you'll find a number of useful utilities are located in the Windows control panel. Here's our Windows 11 desktop, and this is very similar to the way that Windows 10 would operate as well. To start the control panel, we'll go down to the search option. We'll start typing in control, and you can see it fills in and puts control panel right at the top. If we select that, we then see our control panel options. By default, the list of options available in the control panel are shown in a category mode. This does hide a number of the names associated with the different control panel applets, so I'll tend to change the view from category to something like small icons, or the one that I like the most, the large icons. This allows you to see every utility associated with the control panel, and they are all listed in alphabetical order. One of the control panel applets you'll need to know about is the one for Internet options. This provides you with a list of options that are available from your built-in Internet browser. You'll notice that there's information about browsing history on this general tab. You have information about how you want the browser to appear as far as colors and language and fonts. And then you have information about what is displayed in the individual tabs. Under the Security tab, we have the options to define what particular rights and permissions are allowed depending on where we're connected to the internet. For example, if we are on an internet zone, then you will have much more security than if you're somewhere on a local intranet zone. You can also set rights and permissions if you are connecting to a site that you consider to be trusted, and a different set of options if this is a restricted site. The Privacy tab inside of our Internet properties allows us to allow or disallow access to certain sites and how we might deal with the cookies associated with that site. And we also have the option here to change how the pop-up blocker will work inside of our browser. The Content tab gives us information about how certificates are handled inside of the browser, and it turns on or turns off the autocomplete process. If you're connecting to the internet over something other than a direct connection, you may want to modify some of the settings within the Connections tab. This is how you can set up an internet connection that might be dial-up or through a VPN, and you can put all of those parameters into these settings. This is also where you might want to define a proxy server, assuming it's a proxy server that does not work in a transparent mode. You'll find that information under LAN settings, and you'll see there's an option here for automatic configuration of those proxy settings, or you can manually specify a proxy server and add the address yourself. The next option in our internet settings is for programs. This defines how add-ons are configured inside of your browser to extend the capabilities of the browser itself. We can also define certain programs that will be used by default if you're clicking on particular links on a web page. And lastly, we have the option for Advanced. This is a detailed list of configuration settings that allows you to modify the ways that accessibility is used in the browser. We have information about the type of protocols that might be used, and you can define how the browser will react depending on what type of site you're visiting. There may be times when you need to configure settings on a printer or modify the way a particular device is configured. One of the ways to access these configuration parameters is through the option for Devices and Printers. Anything you're connecting to across the network or devices that are directly connected to your computer will be found in this Devices and Printers window. This is a very useful front end, especially for users that need access to the configuration parameters of a device, but they don't want to have to go through the detailed breakdown that's available inside of Device Manager. You can even see that the icons within Devices and Printers make it very easy to identify and select devices that are on your network. In my control panel, I simply select Devices and Printers, and you can see a number of different devices appear. Some of these devices get a generic icon. Other devices are identified as a microphone, and it shows an icon of a microphone, or a printer, and you can see the specific printer names are listed underneath. If you want to modify any of these, you can right-mouse click on any of these devices, configure the options, or change some of the properties of the printer associated with that icon. Often, when you're installing applications, it's a single application installation program that you're using that you may have downloaded directly from the internet. But if you'd like a summary of all of the applications that have been installed on your computer, you can choose the option for Programs and Features. This will show you all of the installations that you've made, and from here, you can choose to uninstall or reinstall different aspects of that application. This gives you a list of all of the applications that are installed. You can see the date that you've installed it on and how much size it's taking on your drive. You can also right mouse click on these applications and choose to uninstall the app to remove it from your computer. There's also an option on this Programs and Features page to turn Windows features on or off. And if we click on that option, it will list a number of different Windows features. You can see there is a large number of them listed. So if you wanted to install a new feature, for example, you wanted to install Internet Information Services Hostable Web Core, or you wanted to uninstall features such as the media features, you can click on that category and click OK, and it will either install or uninstall those features. If you're doing any type of network troubleshooting, then you'll probably spend some time inside of the Network and Sharing Center Control Panel applet. This covers not just your wired network connections, but your wireless connections as well. And from inside of this list, you can choose to look at detailed configurations of every network adapter. In the control panel, you'll find Network and Sharing Center is listed. In this particular case, I have a single active network connection. It's an Ethernet connection. And if I click Click that, it will bring up the Ethernet status, and from here I can see exactly how this particular Ethernet adapter is configured. If you'd like more details about the properties of that adapter, you can click the Properties option, and it brings up a list of all of the different configurations for that adapter. For example, if you wanted to see the IP version 4 information for this adapter, we can simply click on that option and choose Properties. From here, you can see the IP address, subnet mask, any DNS server configurations, or you can see if this adapter has already been configured for DHCP. When you first sit down at a Windows computer, it may not be obvious what specific version of Windows is configured in this system. Under the control panel, you can choose the System applet and get an overview of the system configuration, including the edition of Windows that's running with the version information, and you can see information about the hardware configuration, including the processor, installed RAM, and other details of the operating system. In our Windows 11 control panel, we'll choose the option for System. This will bring up a separate window which shows us in the main window information about this system. We also have options along the left sidebar that other details of the operating system. In our Windows 11 control panel, we'll choose the option for System. This will bring up a separate window which shows us in the main window information about this system. We also have options along the left sidebar that gives us details into information such as Bluetooth and devices, apps, accounts, gaming, accessibility, and other options. You'll also notice in the middle of the page are related links. You can view domain or workgroup information for this device, view the system protection settings. If you choose the Advanced System Settings option, it launches a different dialog box for the system properties. And under the Advanced tab, you have options to change the performance of this system, including things like visual effects and virtual memory. If you would like to change how much virtual memory is being used by your system, you can click that settings option and choose the Advanced tab within those performance options. Inside of here, you can change the virtual memory paging file. You can decide how large that file is, and if you want to make changes to that, you can modify it inside of the virtual memory dialog box. Like many operating systems, Microsoft includes a firewall that is built into the Windows OS. This is called the Windows Defender Firewall, and this allows you to prevent access to your computer from outside of your system. This is separated into two different categories, one for the private networks that you may be connected to, and another one if you're connected to a guest or a public network. For example, you might have a completely different set of security policies if you're inside of your private network, but the moment you go to a coffee shop or connect externally to an internet connection, you may want to use a different set of security features. This is something integrated into Windows and turned on by default, so you don't have to do anything extra to use the capabilities inside of Windows Defender Firewall. If you want to make changes to any of these settings, you can find it under the control panel in Windows Firewall. You'll find the firewall settings under the control panel items, and Windows Defender Firewall is listed under one of those applets. You can see that it launches all of the configurations for the Windows Defender Firewall, and since this device is also connected to a Windows domain, we have a different set of security policies that we can set when we're connected to a domain network. Notice that we have a number of options along the left side to turn on and off the firewall, restore the defaults in case you happen to enable a feature that blocks important traffic, and then you have advanced settings that you can choose, and we will go into the advanced settings of Windows Firewall in a future video. An icon you might not see inside of your control panel is the Mail applet. This applet will not appear unless you have installed a supported email client. For example, if you've installed Microsoft Outlook onto your computer, then the Mail icon will appear in your control panel. If it does appear, you can start it and get options of setting up email accounts and directories, modifying the data files that are used by that email client, or setting up particular profiles for your email settings. If you choose the email accounts option, you'll be presented with a number of email accounts that have been configured on the system, and you can enable, disable, or change the properties of each of those accounts. You also have an option for data files inside of that link where you can define where the files are being stored for all of your email. If you find that this is taking up too much room at the location where it's currently located, you can change the location of that file and redirect everything to that new directory. These days, we rely on not only hearing information coming from our computer, but we often need to input sound into our computer, usually using a microphone. You can manage both the input and output of sound from the sound applet within the control panel. This allows you to modify playback options such as your speakers, or you can choose the recording tab and modify options for your microphone. If you have multiple playback devices or multiple recording devices, you can specify which one of those devices will be the primary or default settings under the sound applet. Your control panel also has an option for your local user accounts. These would be accounts that are stored on your local computer and they're not part of your Active Directory domain. From here, you can modify or add account name information and specify the type of account that this might be. For example, you can configure an account to be a regular user or an administrator account. This is also where you would go to change things like the password associated with this account or modify the icon representing this account name. And if you're doing some type of file encryption on the system, you can manage those encryption certificates from the user accounts applet. Let's bring up the user accounts on this computer. By default, it will show the user account that is currently logged in, and in this case, it is the professor account. From here, you can change things associated with your account control so that you can define when the account control settings would appear on your screen. You can also choose the option to manage all user accounts on this system. On this particular computer, you can see that I only have one user on this computer, and that user is myself, configured as both a user and an administrator. If I want to modify the file encryption certificates, we can choose that option on the left side, and you can modify how those encryption certificates are stored on your system. The Windows operating system doesn't know how to interact with any of the hardware on your system unless there is a device driver that makes that connection between the operating system and the hardware. You would find this list of device drivers under the Windows Device Manager in your control panel. This will allow you to add devices, remove devices, or modify configuration settings specific to these device drivers. This will tell you if Windows is able to see and use that piece of hardware, and you'll be able to make detailed configuration changes if you need to. Inside of our control panel, we can choose the option for Device Manager. This will bring up a separate window with a list of all of the device categories for our system. You can see, for example, there are cameras, disk drives, keyboards, print queues, printers, system devices, and a lot more. Let's look at configuration settings for things like our display adapter. You can see this is a parallels display adapter. And if I right mouse click on it, I can choose to update the driver, disable the device, uninstall that device driver, or scan for any changes that we may have made to the hardware. If we look at the properties for this device driver, we will see a similar set of properties for this and other devices on our network. It has a general tab, a driver tab, details, events, and resources. The general tab gives us information on what this device happens to be. This will give us a summary of what this device is, and you can see under the device status, it will tell us if the Windows operating system is able to use that device properly. Under the driver tab, you can view details for this specific device driver. This is the driver date and the driver version. And if you wanted to know exactly what files are associated with this driver, you can click on driver details and it shows you the entire Windows path for that system file. The next tab over shows us information about the details for this driver. In this case, we only have one value associated with this device driver. If you're wondering if this device driver has ever been updated, you can click the Events tab and it shows you every event associated with this device driver through the years. And lastly, we have the Resources tab that tells us exactly memory ranges, interrupts, and other important hardware information about the configuration of this device driver. If you ever search for things at the search menu within your Windows, you may notice that you get responses back very quickly. It's able to find detailed information that may be hidden within a file that's well inside of your operating system. So, how is Windows able to find that information so quickly? That's because Windows has already gone through the process of indexing all of those files on your system, and it's simply referencing that index to be able to quickly find that information. If you'd like to modify how Windows is providing that index, you can change that configuration under the indexing options. Under the control panel, we choose the option for indexing options. It opens up a new window, and inside of this window, you can see the default settings. It's going to include locations for your start menu and under our users folder. It's going to index everything in those particular folders unless we have set specific exclusions for different types of folders. If you'd like to modify those, you can click the Modify option at the bottom and change the specific folders that are being indexed or not indexed on your computer. Perhaps we'd like to index all of these folders, but instead specify certain types of files that we don't want to index. Under the Advanced option, we can choose the File Types tab, and we can select exactly what type of files would be good to index and what type of files we do not want to include in that search index. If you're a system administrator, there are a number of utilities inside of the control panel that can help you monitor and maintain this computer. You'll find them under a setting called Administrative Tools, or in most recent Windows versions, it's called Windows Tools. Inside of this Windows Tools section might be options for computer management, registry editing, task manager, task scheduler, and much more. The administrative tools or Windows tools can be found in the control panel. It will either be listed as administrative tools, or on later versions of Windows, you'll find the option for Windows tools. This will bring up a separate window that gives us a list of administrative functions that we can use to keep this system up and running. The Windows File Explorer allows us to access individual files and folders on our system. And there are a number of different options you can configure from the File Explorer options inside of your control panel. One of these might be the general options, where you can configure how the folders can be browsed. When you click an item, what happens, and you can specify privacy options as well. You'll find the File Explorer options under that named link inside of your control panel, and it will bring up a separate window with 3 tabs across the top for General, View, and Search. The General tab determines how File Explorer can be used, not only what's shown in the different windows, but what happens when you single-click or double-click a particular file. Under the View tab, you have the option to customize what is displayed or what is hidden inside of the File Explorer. And lastly, under the Search tab, you can make changes to what information will be searched in File Explorer. You can choose whether to include system directories, whether you would like to look into compressed files, such as zip files, to find information within those compressed files, and you can specify whether you're going to look at just the file names or whether you're going to look into the. Under the View tab, you have the Explorer options under that named link inside of your control panel, and it will bring up a separate window with 3 tabs across the top for General, View, and Search. The General tab determines how File Explorer can be used, not only what's shown in the different windows, but what happens when you single-click or double-click a particular file. Under the View tab, you have the option to customize what is displayed or what is hidden inside of the File Explorer. And lastly, under the Search tab, you can make changes to what information will be searched in File Explorer. You can choose whether to include system directories, whether you would like to look into compressed files, such as zip files, to find information within those compressed files, and you can specify whether you're going to look at just the file names or whether you're going to look into the detailed content of every file. Windows also gives us access to many power options, not only for our laptop computers, but we can also change power options on our desktop computers as well. You'll find these options under the control panel under the option marked Power Options. For example, you might be able to set a configuration where your system will hibernate. That means it will take all of the open documents that you're using and all of the applications in use, and will save that information to the drive associated with your system. This is very common on laptop computers because it will save configuration where your system will hibernate. That means it will take all of the open documents that you're using and all of the applications in use and will save that information to the drive associated with your system. This is very common on laptop computers because it will save everything to disk, and even if you lose the battery power, you will still be able to recover where you left off. This is something that's commonly used by the fast startup feature inside of Windows as well. Since it does take a number of seconds to be able to pull the information off of your storage drive and put it back into memory when you power on your system, you may instead want to choose the sleep or standby option. Instead of taking your applications and your data and moving it to a storage drive, it simply keeps everything in the memory of your system. This requires constant power to be able to maintain that particular state. Although it is not a lot of power, it can still take away from the battery on your system. If you're planning to swap out your battery or the battery that you're using is very low, you might want to use the hibernate function instead. And this also gives you a great deal of customization over how every component inside of Windows is using power. In our control panel, instead. And this also gives you a great deal of customization over how every component inside of Windows is using power. In our control panel, we would choose the option for Power Options, and this tells us that there are two current power plans that you can choose from, one that is labeled Balanced and the other one that is labeled Parallels. So if we would like to change how the display is powering off, we can wait 5 minutes, we can wait 45 minutes, or customize the exact time that we would like to use. And if you never want the display to turn off, you can choose the option for Never. You can also have the system automatically put itself to sleep. And again, if you'd like to make it so this system never goes to sleep automatically, instead of setting a specific time frame, you can select the option for Never. If you'd like to have even more, one that is labeled Balanced and the other one that is labeled Parallels. So if we would like to change how the display is powering off, we can wait 5 minutes, we can wait 45 minutes, or customize the exact time that we would like to use. And if you never want the display to turn off, you can choose the option for Never. You can also have the system automatically put itself to sleep. And again, if you'd like to make it so this system never goes to sleep automatically, instead of setting a specific time frame, you can select the option for Never. If you'd like to have even more granularity for the power settings, you can choose the Advanced Power Settings, which opens up a separate window. And from here, you can modify settings for the hard disk, for background settings, the sleep options, PCI Express settings, and settings for your display. If you're on a laptop, this allows you to also customize what happens when you close the top lid of your laptop. Does the laptop stay on? Do you put it into a sleep mode or a hibernate mode? You get to control that from the power options. You can also change settings for your USB interfaces. You may have devices connected to your computer that need to always maintain power from the USB port, and you can configure and manage that process inside of power options. You also have the option to change the way your system is starting up. There's a Windows feature called Fast Startup that's able to bring Windows up and running very quickly when you press the power button to turn on. In reality, it's able to provide this faster startup process because Windows never technically completely shuts down. If you need to completely shut down your operating system each time you turn it off, you may want to turn off those fast startup settings within the power options in the control panel. And Windows also includes a number of accessibility features that allows you to use the operating system. Completely shut down your operating system each time you turn it off. You may want to turn off power from the USB port, and you can configure and manage that process inside of power options. You also have the option to change the way your system is starting up. There's a Windows feature called Fast Startup that's able to bring Windows up and running very quickly when you press the power button to turn on. In reality, it's able to provide this faster startup process because Windows never technically completely shuts down. If you need to completely shut down your operating system each time you turn it off, you may want to turn off those fast startup settings within the power options in the control panel. And Windows also includes a number of accessibility features that allows you to use the operating system even easier. In the control panel, you'll find these options inside the Ease of Access Center. In here, you can do things like start a magnifier, change your on-screen keyboard options, have a narrator that tells you what's on the screen, or set up a high contrast display option. So if you need a little bit of extra help in using your operating system, you might find some very useful features inside the Ease of Access Center. Inside the for help in using your operating system. In a previous video, we described a number of different options that are available inside of the Windows control panel. But Microsoft has slowly been migrating a number of those settings to a new front end known as the Windows Settings app. This Settings app is one single place that you can go with a single consistent user interface, and there are a number of different parameters that you can configure to customize your specific Windows setup. To find the Windows settings, we simply go down to the search option inside of Windows and we look for Settings. And you can see that the Settings app is the option that is the best match in the system. This is the Settings app. You can see along the left side are a number of different categories, and the main part of the screen shows details for each of those categories. Let's step through a number of these categories and see what options might be available to change within our Windows configuration. Under the Time and Language category, you'll see options for date and time, language and region, and more. Under the date and time settings, you can configure Windows to set the date and the time automatically, adjust for daylight saving time, set the time zone and the region you happen to belong in, and more configuration settings. This is a very important setting, especially on a corporate network, because some of the encryption required by Microsoft's Active Directory requires that the time be correct on your computer. So if you wanted to have Windows set this time automatically, you would change the option under Set Time Automatically to On. Windows also has the ability to set different languages as part of the operating system, and under Language and Region, you can specify which language you would like to use for your Windows operating system. There's also an option for Windows Update within the Windows settings, where we can choose to keep our operating system up to date with all of the latest patches and latest updates to the operating system. You can set Windows to install these updates automatically, so you don't even have to think about them. Your system will constantly keep itself up to date with all of the latest updates available from Microsoft. You can also select active hours so that these updates don't occur during your normal workday. If you'd like Windows to avoid making any of these updates when you're normally working, you can configure those within your active hours. If you're using Windows at home, you might even have options to change the personalization of your operating system. This allows you to change the colors in your operating system, the background that's shown. If you're using Windows at home, you might even have options to change the personalization of your operating system. This allows you to change the colors in your operating system, the background that's shown, and information that's displayed as part of your lock screen. In a corporate environment, some of these features may not be enabled on your Windows system, but if you're using Windows at home, you can customize Windows to look and feel exactly the way you'd like. The Windows settings also allow us a way to configure what applications might be installed in our system. That is done in the Apps category. You can uninstall, install, or modify an existing application from this list. You can also add other Windows features. So if you'd like to install other services or include other fonts to be included as part of your operating system, you can enable or disable those under the Windows features. The Privacy and Security category installed in our system. That is done in the Apps category. You can uninstall, install, or modify an existing application from this list. You can also add other Windows features. So if you'd like to install other services or include other fonts to be included as part of your operating system, you can enable or disable those under the Windows features. The privacy and security category is one screen that allows you access to a number of different security features. For example, inside of privacy and security, you can enable antivirus, firewall settings, and change how network protection is being used on your Windows device. We can also specify how much information we would like to share from this Windows operating system. For example, you might want to choose to share your application activity so that you get customized advertising on the Windows desktop. You also have the ability to share what language you might be using so that other websites know what type of content to present to you. And you can also determine whether speech recognition is something you'd like to enable or disable. Often the speech recognition requires a third-party site to send this audio so that it can be processed, and from a privacy perspective, you might not want to send that information to a third party. To be able to manage all of the different pieces of hardware connected to your Windows computer, you can use the Bluetooth and devices category. From inside of this category, you can manage audio settings, information about Bluetooth configurations, and manage other devices such as printers that you might be using. You can also manage mouse settings from inside of this category. So if you want to change what the buttons are doing on your mouse, you can do it within Bluetooth and devices. We also have options for your typing and writing. So if you're using keyboard functions, they can be customized inside of this view. And this is also where you can customize your Windows Pen or Windows Ink if you're using a tablet or a device that takes advantage of a stylus. If you need to make changes to the network configuration, you'll find it in the Windows settings under the category for Network and Internet. Inside of this category, you have options for your Ethernet connectivity, you have VPN configurations, any proxy settings, and if you're still using dial-up, all of your dial-up configurations can be found in this category. From here, you can easily see if your internet connection is up and running. For example, on this particular system, my Ethernet is connected to the rest of the world. You can also change any IP settings. So if you'd like to manage your IP configurations, change the DNS servers that you're using, that can all be done from inside of this category. Microsoft has been working inside of the Windows settings to integrate their PC gaming world with their console gaming world. So you'll find under the gaming category options for an Xbox game bar, and you can view and save any of your capture settings inside of this category. And the settings also gives us a useful front end to be able to modify information about our user accounts. We can manage both our Microsoft account and our local user accounts in this single view. This also allows us to configure email information. We can specify what email app we would like to use, and we can modify sign-in options. So if you'd like to use some type of personal identification number or additional multi-factor authentication, you can configure that inside of the account settings.